that is one good looking brisket.
Big thanks to Kamado Joe for sponsoring this episode.
Today I'm going to be testing the difference between the backyard brisket method and the 4-2-10 method. A while ago I tried the 4-2-10 method on my brisket, which meant I smoked my brisket for 4 hours at a temperature of 120 degrees, getting smoke flavor on the brisket. Then for 2 hours, I went up to a temperature of 140 degrees Celsius, creating a drier, crunchier bark, followed by a 10-hour wrapped. My brisket wrapped in butcher's paper with a little bit of beef tallow that came from that own brisket and tucked into an aluminum pan with a little bit of water to keep it nice and moist. The end result of this cook was freaking amazing. I had a beautiful brisket. It was juicy as can be. Without pressing the water, kept flowing the juices and the fat, and it was so freaking good. However, there was a flaw in this test. In this test, I used a Wagyu brisket, and that made me wonder, is the result that I got out of that 4-2-10 method because of that Wagyu brisket or because of the method? So today, I'm going to try the same thing but with regular brisket, and I'm putting it up to my trusted backyard method, and I'm going to be performing that test on these Big Joes. These are the briskets. There's a lot of trimming to be done on this brisket because it looks absolutely horrendous. I got floppy bits on all sides, so I'm going to trim off the top, then I'm going to round this off. And don't discard the trimmings because they're absolutely freaking delicious for burgers. I want to leave a little bit of that fat on, not too much. On the sides you can clearly see this is a much leaner cut with a lot less intramuscular fat. Only on the top, the point has some intramuscular fat, but the flat is basically as lean as it can be. I'm removing all the fat and silver skin that sits on the bottom of this brisket so that I end up with a nice clean surface for the rub and the smoke. On the bottom of the brisket we have that beautiful lean flat, and on the top we have a little bit of fat cap. Now it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but again, this is not the most expensive brisket in the world either. For my seasoning I'm going to keep things very simple. I'm going to put on some salt and some pepper. Now because this is a thick cut of beef, it needs a lot of seasoning. I like to use fleur de sel salt. If you want to, you can use any type of salt that you prefer. Then it's time for the pepper. And I like a lot of pepper on my brisket, and I do recommend trying a lot of pepper on your brisket, but then again I like my pepper. I waited a while before I turned my brisket, making sure that everything sticks to it and that we're keeping that crust intact, that we're carefully building up every step of the way. There we go, my brisket all seasoned up. That's one good looking brisket. I also trimmed up my other brisket exactly the same way, finished it off with salt and pepper, and now they're both ready for my smoker. And the reason that I'm using two is because I'm going to use those two separate methods. One of these is going to be cooking strictly by time, 4 hours, 2 hours, 10 hours, and the other one is going to be cooking by temperature. Getting the brisket up to 70 degrees core temperature, and once it's reached that point, wrap it up. Cook it to 92 degrees Celsius. So we got two barbecues. One is going to be the 4-2-10 method, and the other one is going to be the classic brisket cooking method. Smoking the briskets, I'm going to start up the same way. I'm going to take my barbecue, I'm going to load it up with big block charcoal, put in one fire starter and light it up. I'm going to add 2 chunks of smoke wood, and once it starts smoking, I'm going to put in my heat deflectors and my grill grates. There we go, beautiful brisket going on. Look at that beauty. I'm gonna stick in a thermometer so I can keep my eye on that temperature, because this is all gonna be about cooking on temperature. And that thermometer is gonna let me keep an eye on the temperature inside the dome and the temperature inside that brisket. I'm gonna close the lid and I'm going to dial in the bottom vent to 1 finger's open, and the top vent to 2 fingers open. And this is the brisket that's going to be cooked to time and nothing else but time. 4 hours of smoking at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. So I'm going to dial it in exactly the same way I did the other one, and I'm going to let these 2 briskets be happy in their smokers. For the last 4 hours, I've been running my 4-2-10 brisket at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius. Now the temperature got a little hot in the barbecue, so I closed the top vent to a little less than 1 finger open. And I also closed the bottom vent to almost all the way closed. That helped me drop down the temperature to that 120 degrees Celsius, and it kept running stable all that time. Now let's take a closer look at it. Woo! That is one good looking brisket. And now we're going to go to the next phase, and that phase is going to be to solve this puddling problem. It's going to give my brisket a spot that I don't want on it. So when you slice into it, it's not going to have a good bark. That's what I want to solve right now. So I'm going to raise up the temperature in my barbecue. I'm going to crack the top vent open just a little bit to 1.5 stripes or 1.5 fingers. And the bottom vent is going to go open 1 finger. For reference, we're going to take a closer look at my classic barbecued brisket. Wow, beautiful dark bark. And again, that nice smoke color sitting on the outside. We do have the same problem with the puddling, but I never used to worry about that. Both briskets are running excellent. The 4210 brisket just finished its first phase, the 4-hour phase at 120 degrees Celsius. We're bumping it up to 140 for 2 hours. The classic brisket is running stable at 120, and I'm gonna keep going for all the way up to 6 hours or until I reach a core temperature of around 75, 80 degrees Celsius, or if I like that bark. My phone alarm rang, 2 hours just went by, and it's time to take the 4210 brisket off and start wrapping it. Let's take a look. Oh, wow, beautiful bark on that brisket. Absolutely gorgeous. And the bark firmed up right there where the puddles used to be. And that's exactly what this method is about. Using a very, very easy technique to create a perfect brisket. Look at that. I'm going to use a little bit of beef tallow to greasen up my butcher's paper. Time to wrap up that brisket. And that's going into a tray. I'm going to add a little bit of water, around 100 milliliters or so, and I'm going to seal that off with aluminum foil. Seal it off real good. Make sure nothing of the moisture can escape. And now this is ready for the third part of the 4210 method. 10 hours at 65 degrees in my oven. And I'm also gonna wrap my other brisket that's been smoking for 6 hours. This is my regular brisket, the way I normally cook it, smoking until I get a beautiful barking crust, and look at that, it's so beautiful. Except for this puddle right there, that's not as beautiful. And that's the difference. With the 4210 method, you have that 2 hours where you crank up the temperature and evaporate the puddles. Now that I have the 4210 method, this is kind of crazy not to get rid of that puddle. But for the sake of the experiment, I'm gonna stick to the classic way, and I'm gonna wrap it up like I always do with a little bit of beef tallow to greasen up the butcher's paper. Fold in the paper, getting it nice and tight. And that last bit of paper is going to go underneath, because that extra bit of paper is going to protect the brisket from drying out. It's going to go back on the barbecue. I'm going to stick in my thermometer, and I'm going to let this continue to cook, running the barbecue at a temperature of 120 degrees Celsius until we get a core temperature on that brisket of 92 degrees Celsius. I just got the notification my brisket hit a core temperature of 93 degrees Celsius, so it's time to take it off. Oh boy, ooh. I was waiting for that. All the juices want to run out. I'm going to quickly dump it in this bag that's going to keep it nice and warm. Then I'm sticking into another insulated bag. I'm going to let this brisket rest for 2 hours, and then it's time to slice into it. A serious amount of time, but I want to do this right and make sure that we give this brisket the absolute maximum chance of good results. Let's open this up. Nice greasy paper. Wow. Well, that is one beautiful looking brisket. Beautiful bark, nice intact. Feels absolutely fantastic. I got a little bit of that puddle damage right there. This brisket is gonna set the standard for this experiment. Is it gonna be good? Is it gonna be better than the 4-2-10 method? Let's find out. Oh. Beautiful brisket. Looks magical. Of course, not as juicy as that Wagyu brisket, but still a beautiful, juicy brisket. Now this is the flat bit. Let's take a look at this point part. And again, an amazing brisket. We got a little smoke ring sitting on top, not too much. All right, so let's take a slice out of this. I definitely overcooked this brisket and I hate myself for doing that. It's just something that is really a pitmaster to blame, and it kind of affects this experiment because now it looks like this might not be a good method that I'm using. But that's totally not true. The backyard method is the one that I've always been using and worked really well for me. However, I let it run a little too far and now I ended up with a brisket that I can't slice properly. Now, let's just take a piece and see how that pool is. You can see, pop, way too little pool. Absolutely no excuse for doing that, so I should have taken it off a little earlier. 92 degrees, and then do not let it overshoot. However, what I do like about this is that it's still juicy, it's tender, it's got that great bark. It's proven that the backyard method of cooking the brisket to color and then wrapping it up, cooking it to temp, always works. Oh, I'm feeling good. Now the exciting moment has come. Let's check out our 4-2-10 method, because this thing has been through a journey of 16 hours, 4 hours of smoking, 2 hours of removing puddles, and 10 hours of slow cooking and making this thing absolutely melt. Now, I have faith in this method. Let's see if I'm right or if I'm wrong. There's a lot less moisture and fat compared to what we had with our Wagyu brisket. There's just this little bit of fat. So, I hope we get good results. Wow, the brisket looks absolutely amazing. So that's a good sign. We got a nice crust. We don't have any puddles. This looks freaking awesome. What a beauty. I just added the other brisket so we can have a side-by-side comparison. This is the brisket that we cooked earlier, and of course it's been out for a while, but still there's a lot to take away from here. So when I opened up the 4-2-10 brisket and I didn't see any moisture in the tray, I got a little worried. I gotta be honest, I have, well, a little bit of doubt issues. Where I was a strong believer before I opened up the tray, now, let's slice into it and see what it looks like on the inside. Wow. That is one good looking brisket. You see how that fat rendered down completely? And all of the meat looks juicy. And we got a beautiful smoke ring right there, right there, right there. All the smoke ring is visible. I got a little bit of dry crunch at the bottom, but that's just fine. This is a good looking brisket. But the fact is that the fat rendered out better in the 4-2-10 brisket method. So that's almost all the way disappeared. And here there's still some hard pieces of fat left. So even though I overcooked it and I went above and beyond to render out that fat, well, the only result that I got is that it started falling apart. The fat didn't go away, it didn't melt and make a juicy brisket. Wherever with the 4-2-10, time did all the work. So I didn't cook it all the way up there to 92 or 96, but time let everything melt and time made sure that everything became so juicy and delicious. So you gotta think about that. This method is doing something for us. Not only is it a very easy method, it's also pushing us to take the time to render down the fat completely and make a very enjoyable eating experience. I would love to hear what you guys think, and I would love to hear if you guys want me to make a video on how to smoke a brisket on a Kamado. Just let me know.